You know, when you hear the name Edgar Allan Poe, you probably picture haunted houses, maybe being buried alive, or that famous raven tapping on the door. But Poe was so much more than just a writer of spooky stories. See, he was a master architect, and his most terrifying structures weren't built with stone and wood. They were built inside the human mind.
And that really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What is this source of real, genuine, bone-chilling terror? Is it some monster lurking in the shadows, or is it something else? Well, for Poe, the answer was revolutionary. He believed the deepest horror doesn't come from anything supernatural. It comes from inside us. His big move was to internalize fear, to drag it out of the crumbling old castles and drop it right into the fragile consciousness of his characters, and, by doing that, into ours.
So let's really dig into that shift, from the outside world to the inside. Now, Poe absolutely used all those gloomy backdrops from the Gothic tradition. You know, decaying mansions, bleak landscapes, but he gave them a new job. They became these incredible metaphors for the mind's own twisted and shadowy corridors. They were a setting for a whole new kind of exploration. This idea, which our source material just nails, is the absolute key to getting Poe. The monsters in his stories, they aren't really ghouls or ghosts, not in the way you might think. No, they are the real-life demons of paranoia, of obsession, of a mind literally breaking apart. The terror is born from a mind at war with itself.
So what exactly is going on inside that haunted mind he writes about? Well, he basically created a blueprint of human anxiety. He mapped out the territories of our deepest, most primal fears. I mean, Poe is basically one of the godfathers of what we now call psychological horror. This is the kind of horror that shifts the focus away from external threats, like a killer with an axe, to the chaos happening inside a character's head. The real tension isn't about what's going to happen to them, it's about what's already happening inside them. And man, did he have some recurring obsessions. He came back again and again to themes of mental breakdown, like the narrator's mania in The Telltale Heart. And get this, his focus on the fear of being buried alive, that wasn't just some made-up spooky trope. The source material points out this was a very real social anxiety in the 19th century, back before embalming was a common thing. He was tapping into real fears of his time.
Okay, so this is huge. Let's talk about maybe his most powerful trick in the book, the first-person narrator you just can't trust. When he uses this, we're not just watching the story unfold from a safe distance. Oh no, we are literally trapped inside a mind that is actively breaking down. And this is where the real tension comes from. Poe's narrators are always trying to convince you they're sane. They'll say, "I'm not mad," right before they carefully explain some completely insane act. It puts you, the reader, in this incredibly uncomfortable spot. You're seeing this horrifying world through the eyes of a monster who has no idea that's what he is.
So these narrators, they kind of have a type. For one, they're often nameless, which makes them feel like they could be anyone, right? Our source material calls them a flaneur, which is basically just a fancy word for an observer who sees things happening but totally misses the point. They're all about intense sensations instead of logic. And at the end of the day, they just leave you completely hanging, with no idea what was real.
All right, so when you put all this together, the psychological focus, the narrator you can't trust, what do you get? You get this world where the line between what's sane and what's not just completely dissolves. Let's look at how he pulls this off.
The fall of the House of Usher is like the perfect case study. The narrator shows up at this house that is a literal reflection of a decaying mind. He watches his friend Roderick just completely fall apart mentally, and it's mirrored by his sister Madeline's physical sickness. Then they bury her alive, which is this desperate act of trying to bury some repressed part of themselves. But here's the thing. You can't keep that kind of horror buried forever. Her violent return makes the house itself, and the house of the mind, just completely collapse.
And this brings up another really fascinating theme that our source points out. So many of Poe's stories are about a male protagonist trying and failing to control or suppress some powerful woman or feminine idea. In Bernice, it's an obsession with his cousin's teeth that leads to a horrifying act. In Ligeia, a dead wife's will is so strong she comes back from the grave. And in Usher, Madeline's return is what brings everything crashing down. The big takeaway here, in Poe's universe, whatever you try to push down, it always comes back, and usually it's out for blood.
So in the end, you're just left in this terrifying limbo. Was the House of Usher really haunted, or was it all in the narrator's head? Did Ligeia actually come back from the dead, or did her husband just go crazy from grief? Poe never just hands you the answer, and that not knowing, that's exactly where the horror lives.
So, okay, let's talk about his legacy. Poe died way back in 1849, but his work feels as unsettling and modern as ever. Why are we still so obsessed with him? Why does he cast such a long shadow?
You know, it's funny, his superstar status wasn't exactly immediate. After his first few collections got him some attention, his reputation really grew after he died. Our source notes that by 1875, he had a public monument, and by 1921, a big bronze statue. He went from being this guy who wrote popular, shocking stories to being seen as a true master who had mapped a whole new territory for literature.
And that's exactly why he still feels so incredibly modern. The source points out that Poe's obsession with psychological breakdown, with characters who have no moral compass or grip on reality, was way ahead of its time. It basically predicted the big literary movements of the 20th century, like modernism and existentialism. The guy was just light years ahead of everyone else.
Which leaves us with one last, kinda chilling question. Poe's entire body of work is built on this one idea, that the most haunted house you'll ever find is your own mind, and the scariest monsters are the ones we make ourselves. So after all this, you have to ask yourself, was he right?